Hello, wizards, witches, and everyone in between. My name is Emma, and today I will be discussing The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This video is a little bit impromptu because I wanted to discuss this as soon as I could after I read it so that I would remember all the things I wanted to say. This video will be split up between a non-spoiler section first and then a spoiler section, so I will let you guys know when I switch over to spoilers. So this book isn't exactly new, it came out last year, but I had actually never heard about it until like a week or two ago. I've read The Darkest Part of the Forest and Spiderwick, I think are the only two things that previous to this I have read by Holly Black, but I know she is like the fairy queen, and I love fairies. I've loved fairies since I was a kid. So this book follows three sisters who are kidnapped from the mortal world and are taken to the fairy world by their father/stepfather, depends on which sister you're talking about. And from there, they grow up being, two of them grow up being mortals among the fairies in the fairy realm. Right now, I'm watching Game of Thrones for the first time, and I think we just started season 3, but this book reminds me of the first season of Game of Thrones, if any of you guys know what I'm talking about. Even down to, I'm not gonna give anything away, but like the ending of, or one of the major like culminating things that happens at the end of the first season of Game of Thrones happens like towards the end of this book in a similar sense, where like shit just goes down. And this is one of the few books I've read in the last couple years where my jaw literally dropped. I was like, what just happened? And I was unaware that this book is split into two separate books, and the second book kind of starts like fairly late, so all the shit that went down occurred like at the end of book 1, and then book 2 is like, how do we deal with this? It has been at least a year since I have read something that I was this excited about and this engaged with. I love the feeling more than anything, whether it's reading or a TV show, where you think about it during the day and you like actively cannot wait to get home so you can read more or you can watch more of whatever it is. And I totally felt like that with this. What I really liked about this was how, well, first of all, there's a map at the beginning. So any book that has a map at the beginning, you know that it's gonna be a good time. And I also liked how many magical creatures were in this. Aside from fairies, there were all these different ones that I had never heard of that I ended up Googling, and they are like actual mythical creatures that some of them are freaking weird. But it was so cool to see all of these different creatures interacting within this world. It was so cool to see the main character learn kind of the pros and cons of her being mortal in a fairy realm. I also loved all of the different like royal households of this realm. There's like a bunch of different kingdoms, and all of the people are kind of creepy. There's a lot of weird princes. You know, everyone's trying to get the throne, of course, kind of like Game of Thrones. I really love the way that Holly Black does her world building, because there's no like info drop where, you know, you have like 20 pages of from the ancient times when fairies rule the earth and mortals, whatever. It didn't have that whole like, let's have a brief biography of the history of the fairy race or whatever. It didn't have any of that, which I appreciated. It had LGBTQ plus romance, which I also appreciated. And it was just, you learn all these secrets along with the main character Jude, which is another thing I like about it. I prefer to learn things along with the characters rather than having, what's it called? There's a word for it! There's a word for it when you know like everyone in the book except the main character, and the reader also knows something that the main character doesn't know yet. dramatic irony? Anyway, this didn't have that, and so I was constantly like, what? Along with the Jude, who was also like, what? So I thought that was really cool. This also deals with bullying, which I thought was interesting. It deals with kind of gender stereotypes, because Jude is interested in sword fighting, and her twin is more interested in like the cliche, I'm gonna marry a prince and be a wife kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with either of those, but it was cool to have two characters who wanted different things and to see how accepting people were of Taryn's, Jude's twin's, wants for the future, and how they judged Jude for her wants to be a knight and to learn how to sword fight and all that kind of stuff. I think that's all I have to say that is non-spoilery. I do want to add that I also love the humor in this. There were some really funny lines. Like, for instance, this guy like goes up to this door, and the door has a huge like face on it with like a knocker, and the door greets him, and then he greets the door by saying like, hello, my door. Just like weird little things like that I was like, this is great. I want to travel to this land and say hello to all the doors. Okay, that is the end of my spoiler-free section, so if you have not read it, please go read it, come back and watch the spoiler section, or if you're not planning on reading it and you're nosy and you just want to know things, then stick around, but don't get mad at me if I spoil something for you and you didn't want me to. Okay, so this frickin' book. Okay, first of all, to have Madoc, I think I said Madoc in my head, but it's probably Madoc, come in, murder their parents within the first chapter when they were just casually eating fish sticks and watching cartoons or something. I was just like, whoa. Like, this is the type of book this is. They get whisked away, and then it's like, you know, time passes, and then we meet up with them again. I just thought the sibling dynamic was really interesting too, to have the conflicts between the twins, but have the older sister be the one who's actually immortal and a fairy and part of that life. I thought it was interesting. There's a lot of reflection on Jude, on her, I guess, stepfather, about, you know, she hates him for what he did to her parents, but she also likes him and respects him and is confused by what he wants because he's so bloodthirsty, and I thought that was really interesting too. I loved that Jude became a spy for Prince Dane. I thought that was the coolest thing. I loved the ghost, the other two. I'm horrible with character names, but the three other spies with her. I loved all of their interactions. I loved just the casual kind of the way that the author introduces how things work in the fairy world, with like, they wake up later in the day, they have classes like at night, and then they go to bed like late morning, early morning. That kind of stuff was really cool to me. And I knew there was gonna be something important with Oak. At first I was like, okay, he is mentioned just enough, but also not enough, where I was like suspicious about what he was doing, even though he's just a kid. I was like, there has to be something going on with that. But I honestly didn't see it coming, that he was the kid that all the letters were about and the whole poison thing was about. Because I did think that he was Madoc's wife's kid. Just because she seemed, I didn't really, like, I don't like her, I don't trust her because she is with him. So I figured she would only really love Oak if he was her own kid. So I didn't see that coming in terms of her like taking him and like raising him as her own. The frickin' end of book 1 in this, where almost everyone in that royal family dies, I was like, what? Like, when the first person died, that's when my jaw dropped. And then it just stayed like that. I looked so stupid because all of these people were killing each other. And I was like, this is some Game of Thrones shit. I loved when Jude has Prince Cardan tied up. I thought it was really interesting to see that side of him and see how he was like the one of the group that was bullying Jude who was most reluctant to do that, he never actually wanted her to die. It's nice to see that side of him, but I do feel like that romance was kind of forced between him and Jude. I didn't really like it. It kind of came out of nowhere when they were like kissing and stuff. I don't know. I feel like that was unnecessary. And the whole thing of Taryn being with Locke when Jude liked Locke and she thought Locke liked her, but then at the like ceremony at the end of book 1 where like all the shit went down and everyone died, he was like asking her these kind of weird questions. If you really loved me, would you let me go? Or stuff like that. And then when Taryn was hiding who had proposed to her, I was like, okay. But that whole thing with Locke I just found kind of unnecessary also, because we didn't really get to know Locke enough to be like, wow, I can't believe he would treat Jude like that. I barely know who you are. I loved how many strong female characters there were in this. I loved the LGBTQ+ romance in this. I love that Vivian was in love with a mortal but couldn't figure out how to tell her. I love that she decided to take Oak with her back to the mortal world and then they end up at Target, which I was like, that is so relatable. And I could just picture Oak with like his little horns, like looking at all this stuff at Target that he's like never seen before. That's just really cute. I totally saw it. I'm sorry, everything I'm talking about is like so out of order, but I just have so many things to say. But I totally saw it coming when, like I said, I suck at names. But there was that servant girl that Jude kept seeing who was like cleaning out the fireplace and stuff and was like in that weird trance. I totally saw it coming that she was gonna kill herself somehow because she seemed really reluctant and then she seemed like her mind was just so confused when she got pulled out of the castle and I was like, she's gonna do something. Like I thought when Jude had left her and told her to stay there, I was like, she's gonna come back and be dead somehow. But then when she wasn't, I was like, interesting. But then she ended up killing herself anyway, so that was really sad. I also like that Jude had the kind of side of like, she has these like violent tendencies and she has the ability to kill people, which people assume she doesn't and which she doesn't really like that part of herself that much, but it does make her a really good spy. It makes her really badass. I also liked all the, like I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this with like the things that mortals can do that immortals can't and vice versa, with the whole like mortals can lie but immortals can't lie, and how Jude would use that to her advantage. I liked the whole thing of her getting, I guess, controlled or whatever so that she couldn't tell people that she was being a spy. That whole thing was cool. The whole like berries so that you can't be controlled was cool. Her poisoning herself a little bit all the time so that at the end she could drink the poison and not die. That was cool. The whole thing was just, it was so good. So if you have read this, let me know what you thought. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, the romancy things in it were really the only downside for me, but it doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things because the book was just so good and I need to get my hands on the second one now. Alright you guys, I hope you enjoyed this weird rant off the top of my head, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!